Diane Keaton, Oscar-winning actress, has passed away. Keaton rose to prominence in 1972 with her unforgettable role in The Godfather. It was an abortion, Michael. It was a son. And I had to kill because this... And later solidified her place in cinematic history through her collaboration with Woody Allen in Annie Hall, a performance that earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress. She reportedly died at her home in California. Keaton is survived by her 2 children. She was 79 years old. She made eccentricity elegant, turned suits and fedoras into fashion statements, transformed awkwardness into a kind of quiet strength. Diane Keaton didn't just break the mold. She refused to acknowledge it existed. But behind the signature laugh and oversized glasses lived a woman far more complex than the public persona woman who once drank 25 bottles of wine a week, battled bulimia for 5 years, loved deeply, but was never chosen in return, stood by Woody Allen when the world turned away, adopted 2 children after the age of 50, and never let anyone call her wife. So why has Diane Keaton never married? Why did she fall for men like Al Pacino and Woody Allen, yet never walk down the aisle? And how did she become a cultural icon by rejecting everything Hollywood expected of her? This isn't just the story of a woman who stayed single. It's the story of someone who redefined what it means to live on your own terms, the real reason. Diane Keaton never needed a wedding to define her life. She was born Diane Hall on January 5, 1946 in Los Angeles, California. Raised in a conservative Catholic household, her father was a civil engineer and real estate broker, while her mother Dorothy was a homemaker with artistic dreams that never came true. Dorothy once won the title of Mrs. Los Angeles, a contest for mothers judged on homemaking skills. To young Diane, it was a moment of awe and unease. She remembered her mother standing on stage, radiant, crowned for her perfect chocolate cake and spotless home. But the glory lasted only minutes. When the lights dimmed, that woman returned to the kitchen, to her husband, to a life where dreams of theater and literature were quietly shelved. Diane would later say she felt both proud and terrified. Her mother could have been a writer, an artist, but she gave it all up. That planted a fear in Diane that becoming the ideal woman meant disappearing, sacrificing your voice to serve someone else's story. So Diane made a vow: she would not vanish. She would not lose herself just to keep a family together. And if preserving her dreams meant defying every expectation of what a woman should be, she was ready to pay that price. Her artistic journey didn't begin under the name we know today. Born Diane Hall, she moved to Manhattan after studying at Orange Coast College to pursue acting. When she tried to register with the Actors Equity Association, she discovered another Diane Hall had already claimed the name. So she chose her mother's maiden name, Keaton, as a declaration of identity. "I will be the one they remember," she seemed to say. Standing 5'7" with expressive brown eyes and an unmistakably offbeat charm, Diane stood out. In 1968, amid the cultural revolution of hippie ideals, anti-war protests, and personal liberation, she landed her first Broadway role in the musical Hair. The show was famous for its full-cast nude scene at the end of Act 1. Diane refused to strip, even when offered an extra $50. It was a small act of defiance, but it spoke volumes. She would perform but not conform. That same year, she met Woody Allen. Their chemistry was immediate, intellectual, emotional, and artistic. They dated briefly, but their bond endured far beyond romance. In 1977, she starred in Annie Hall, a film Allen wrote with her in mind. It wasn't just a role, it was a mirror. The character's quirks, wardrobe, cadence were all Diane. The film won her an Academy Award and made her a household name. But fame didn't erase her insecurities. Behind the scenes, Diane struggled with bulimia, a battle she kept hidden for years. She consumed entire pies, loaves of bread, and buckets of fried chicken in a single sitting, then purged in silence. It was a cycle of shame and control, a way to cope with the pressure of being seen, but not truly known. She also drank heavily. At one point, she admitted to consuming 25 bottles of wine a week. It wasn't glamour, it was escape. And then there were the memoir and beady Al Pacino, Woody Allen. She loved them all deeply and earnestly, but none of them chose her in the end. She never married, never wore the white dress, never walked down the aisle. "I didn't want to give up my independence," she said. "I didn't want to become someone else's version of me." Instead, she built a life on her own terms. At 50, she adopted her first child, then another. She became a mother without a partner, a parent without a blueprint, and she never apologized for it. Hollywood didn't know what to make of her. She wasn't seductive in the traditional sense. She didn't chase youth or perfection. She wore baggy suits, spoke in tangents, and laughed too loud. But that was her power. She made oddness magnetic, made awkwardness feel like armor, made being different look like destiny. She defended Woody Allen when others distanced themselves, not because she agreed with everything, but because loyalty mattered to her. She believed in nuance, in complexity, in the idea that people are more than their worst headlines. And through it all, she kept working Baby Boom, father of the bride. Something's Gotta Give films that celebrated women who were strong, funny, and flawed. She became a symbol not of rebellion, but of quiet resistance, of choosing yourself even when the world tells you not to. So why has Diane Keaton never married? Because she didn't need a wedding to feel whole, didn't need a husband to feel loved, didn't need a title to feel worthy. She chose herself again and again, and in doing so, she became something rare in Hollywood. A woman who aged without apology, who laughed without restraint, who lived without regret. This isn't just the story of a woman who stayed single. It's the story of a woman who stayed true. She said it without hesitation. "I'm not doing it not because I'm afraid, because it's not me." That refusal didn't cost Diane Keaton the role. It earned her respect. In an era when conformity was currency, she chose authenticity. But not every demand was so easily dismissed. At just 19, Keaton was asked to lose nearly 10 pounds to keep a role. That request, seemingly routine in the world of theater, left a deeper mark. It was the beginning of a 5-year battle with bulimia. Like many young women of the time, Diane began punishing her body to fit an image crafted by others. The stage demanded perfection. She gave it pain. What she didn't know was that in the audience that night sat a man who would soon change. Her life, someone who would not only help her navigate the storm, but become her most enduring creative partner. Woody Allen after Hair. Diane auditioned for Play It Again, Sam. A play written by and starring Allen. The female lead was the romantic foil to the neurotic main character, co-ed, humorous, and capable of making awkwardness magnetic. Diane was all of that. But there was one concern. She was 2 inches taller than Allen. The director worried the height difference might disrupt the visual dynamic. Then Diane walked into the room, opened her mouth, and erased every doubt. She won the role and delivered a performance so compelling she earned a Tony nomination for Best Featured Actress. Not long after rehearsals began, she and Allen had dinner and began a personal and artistic relationship that would span decades. They weren't like other Hollywood couples. Diane didn't try to be seductive. She simply was herself. And Allen, with the instincts of a true artist, recognized that Keaton wasn't a typical star. She was something else entirely. Soon after, Diane made her film debut in Lovers and Other Strangers in 1970, and then came the role that changed everything. Francis Ford Coppola cast her as Kay Adams in The Godfather, 1972. Though she wasn't a familiar face, Coppola saw what he needed in her: gentleness that wasn't naive, a distance that still drew people in. With just a few scenes in one of the most iconic films in cinematic history, Diane Keaton, the eccentric girl from Broadway, officially stepped into Hollywood. Her early career was unpredictable. She didn't chase approval. She didn't mold herself to fit public tastes. But it was precisely this offbeat quality that began to attract major directors, especially Coppola. While casting The Godfather, he saw something in Keaton that others missed: vulnerability wrapped in quiet strength, a femininity that didn't beg for attention but held its own. Despite being virtually unknown and dismissed by some as too quirky, Coppola personally invited her to play Kay Adams. It was a controversial choice at the time, but history proved him right. The Godfather didn't just immortalize Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, and Robert Duvall. It quietly introduced Diane Keaton as an indispensable presence in a world dominated by men. The film was an instant triumph. But it was The Godfather Part 2 in 1974 where Keaton's role truly deepened. She returned as Kay, the woman once promised a life far from crime. Instead, she found herself trapped in Michael Corleone's shadow, facing closed doors and emotional isolation. She wasn't the central figure. There were no shootouts, no monologues. But every time she appeared, audiences felt something rare in that violent world, the human cost of power. One of the most unforgettable scenes is Kay's confession. She had an abortion, not for health reasons, but because she refused to bring another child into Michael's world. That moment didn't just sever their relationship, it was a final rejection of the Corleone empire. And the ending, Michael silently closing the door in her face, remains one of the most haunting images in cinematic history. No guns, no screams, just a glance and silence. In that silence, Diane Keaton became the emotional heartbeat of a tragedy. The Godfather Part 2 wasn't just acclaimed, it made history. It won 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Francis Ford Coppola, Best Supporting Actor Robert Duvall, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score, and Best Art Direction. Roger Ebert called it a masterpiece of American tragedy. Time and Empire gave it near-perfect scores. The domestic box office surpassed $93 million on a $13 million budget. Enormous for its time, not counting home video and digital revenue. Diane Keaton never set out to become a feminist icon, but simply by existing in the frame quietly, calmly, unapologetically, she left a lasting impact. While Part 3 may not be held in the same reverence as its predecessors, omitting Kay Adams would be a mistake. She was the woman who never belonged to the mafia world, yet always stood as a reminder of what cruelty costs. And if The Godfather is an American tragedy written in betrayal, sacrifice, and power, then Diane Keaton across 3 decades was its final moral anchor. If The Godfather was the launch pad, then Annie Hall was the moment Diane Keaton's name became legend. Originally titled Anhedonia, the film began as a sprawling 150-minute experiment filled with tangents and discarded scenes. Co-writer Marshall Brickman even feared it was unfixable, but through a meticulous post-production process, Woody Allen reshaped the draft into a focused, emotionally resonant narrative centered on the relationship between Alvy and Annie. The final cut ran just 93 minutes raw, intimate, and revolutionary. Filming lasted 10 months, with entire sequences revised or scrapped. Scenes like the philosophical basketball game and the cello-playing doctor were cut to preserve rhythm and clarity. Annie Hall remains one of cinema's clearest examples of how editing can sculpt a masterpiece. Annie Hall won 4 major Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Actress for Diane Keaton. It also claimed 5 BAFTs and a Golden Globe. The National Society of Film Critics named it Best Film of the Year. Roger Ebert called it a modern romantic comedy masterpiece. But perhaps the film's most enduring cultural impact came not from its script, but from its wardrobe. Keaton didn't dress according to the costume notes. She brought her own style, too. The role: oversized shirts, slouchy trousers, vests, fedoras, loose ties. Woody Allen initially objected, but ultimately let her take control. Some pieces were from Ralph Lauren, but the styling was entirely Keaton's own. From the quirky girl in Annie Hall, Diane Keaton steadily established herself as a multidimensional actress, never flashy, never chasing trends, but always present at the rawest edge of emotion. Yet Diane Keaton has never been just an actress. She once ventured into directing. Unstrung Heroes 1995 received positive reviews. Though she didn't continue down that path, the film stood as proof of her independent, delicate, and emotionally intelligent storytelling. Off-screen, she spent hours wandering with a camera in hand, capturing street corners, quiet homes, fleeting moments with the obsession of someone who truly saw beauty in the ordinary. She lived boldly. She loved deeply. She raised children on her own terms. She stood by friends when it wasn't easy. She aged with grace and grit. And through it all, she remained unmistakably Diane. If her story teaches us anything, it's that you don't need a wedding to feel complete, a spotlight to feel seen, or a script to know your worth. You just need courage and a little bit of style. Diane Keaton didn't just leave behind a legacy of films. She left behind a blueprint for authenticity, a reminder that being different isn't a flaw, it's a gift, and that sometimes the loudest impact comes from the quietest voice. Thank you, Diane, for the laughter, for the honesty, for the hats. You didn't just act, it inspired, and that more than any award is the mark of a true icon. If this story moved you or sparked curiosity, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the lives of the stars who shaped history. We'll keep bringing you the stories behind the spotlight, the ones you've never heard but won't forget. And now, we want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.